Sri Lanka is facing a crisis because of climate change. We are now experiencing more serious droughts, more frequent floods, landslides, coastal erosion, storm, and other cyclonic impacts. We have been suffering for the past 10 to 15 years, and we will be suffering for the next 100 years. This is only going to get more serious. That's why it is essential to discuss about this timely topic today. According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it defines climate change as any change in the climate over time. It could be either to natural variability or even as a result of human activities. A very good morning to all of you. I'm Yasasmika Vage, one of the moderator for this session. It's now time for me to hand over control to our moderator, Sega. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Yasasmi. I couldn't agree more with you as what you stated a few minutes ago. And it's extremely important for us to understand the importance of climate change and its negative impact. So I'm Sega Danukshan. I've been in the peace building and development sector for the past 5 years. My focus is mainly set upon climate change and its impacts. So now, Yasasmi, you explained about climate change, right? Now I want to shift the focus slightly a bit on global warming, because something is connected in between global warming and climate change, as far as I understand. So global warming, as you may know, it's the long-term heating of the Earth's climate system, and it has been observed since the pre-industrial period, somewhere between 1850s to 1900s. So and it's mainly because of human activities and mainly because of burning of fossil and fuel over the period, and it has an incremental impact in heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's surface. So 5 years ago, countries got together and they were committed with a sound called Paris Agreement. And 5 years on now, there is so much of carbon dioxide emissions out there in the environment. We are resulted in an average increase in temperature of 1.2 degrees Celsius. And indeed, we recorded 5 years of continuous global warming years, and it's a record ever since 2015. So I believe that now this is a great time. Indeed, it's the need of the hour, or perhaps the need of the minute, to discuss about these changes. And I think you need to explain more about climate change and its impacts. I think you have something to say, right, Sasmi?
Exactly, Sega. So to discuss about all these things, today we have in Town Talks an expert who is here with us today. She is a senior project coordinator on migration, environment, and climate change, working for IOM, which is the United Nations Migration Agency and the United Nations Humanitarian Country Teams for emergency response. Not only that, she is also a social researcher, data scientist, and a business analyst, currently working in the field of integrating smart farming technologies to enhance social enterprises led by women in Sri Lanka. She's none other than Mrs. Brangita Balasuriya. A very good morning to you, ma'am.
Very good morning to you as well. And thank you very much for inviting me today. And I think it's a great privilege to be here because it is some sort of a platform that we are trying to provide some sort of knowledge on climate change and the other related aspects. However, as you correctly mentioned, climate change is a very new topic, I would say. People do talk about it. Hence, it's a very old thing. It's not new. As Sega very correctly mentioned, climate change is not a new phenomenon. It's happening. It's keep on going. It's changing us. It's changing the world. It's changing the entire Earth's surface as well as the entire environment. Now, if you look at like this entire context of climate change and how it affects people and the living beings on the earth in general, it's more like, I would say, a disease, which is like a silent killer. You can't really see the impact of it up until you get it like drastically outburst. So maybe the small symptoms that we see around are actually trying to create a big disaster at the end. It's more like, let's say all these people are talking about coronavirus these days. I think we have a health professional also here. I think she would be able to give more insight. But still, if you look at, like, in coronavirus, they say if you have fever, if you have cough, if you have these symptoms, that you are diseased, basically, like, you have some sort of a illness. Climate change is also like that. It gives you some sort of signs, like symptoms. Unfortunately, we are very, very ignorant to understand all these small symptoms and to give over to our, environment and the people and their understanding on this. So I think this is a very good, important initiative.
Yes, exactly as you said, ma'am. I would also agree that the globe is now going for a better change. So I'm sure, Sega, you have something to add to this, as she clearly said how climate change is happening and how do we get to know about that.
Of course,
Sega?
yes. Yes, of course, yes. I fully endorse what Rangita said. But adding on to Ms. Rangita's statement, I would like to also, find the underpinning of the health aspect, because most of the people doesn't know the connection health has with climate change and how climate change impacts health. So we have an expert to discuss about this connection also. So we have a distinguished expert in the field of occupational and environmental health. She had pursued her postdoctoral training at the Monash Center for Occupational and Environmental Health in Australia, Monash, Australia, and she's a board certified specialist in the community medicine, and she worked as a consultant community physician in the Environmental and Occupational Health Directorate, the Ministry of Sri Lanka. Dr. Suraweera, it's a pleasure having you for this imperative webinar, and we would like to discuss more on the connection in between health and climate change. How would you explain that connection, Doctor?
Yes, a very good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I think this is something very important, and I'm very, very happy that you all have organized this. In fact, yes, now we need to understand health is determined by so many factors. We call those as, like, determinants of health. If you just take the environment is a significant determinant of health. And of course, I will just try to show this giving an example. As per the World Health Organization, they have mentioned that 23% of the deaths that are happening in the world annually happen due to these environmental risk factors. Basically, 1/4 of people, they are dying due to this environment. And on the other hand, if you try to understand what these environmental risks are, air pollution, climate change, chemical misuse, and of course, occupational exposures, all those things are there. So you can understand that climate change is affecting the health of humans. We need to understand it's not only the polar bears, but certainly humanity is also at a huge risk due to climate change. And if I mention the health impacts, I think as we go along, we will be able to describe. You will realize that almost all our systems are affected due to climate change. Therefore, as humans, we need to be very careful, and then, of course, not take this as fiction anymore. And we need to understand that our health is affected significantly due to climate change.
Yes, thank you, doctor. Thank you for your wonderful explanation on the nexus in between health and climate change. Also, doctor, I would also add that most of the people doesn't know the health impacts that they are facing is due to climate change. So that is the awareness that we want to bring in at this point of time. And also going back to Ms. Rangita's comment, I'm kind of interested and curious to know how the environmental degradation connects to climate change. What are the impediments? What are the determinants? What are the facets of it? So I think, Yasasmi, you have something to ask from Ms. Rangita on that, and I would like to know more about it. Yes.
Exactly, Sega. So, as Mrs. Rangita clearly stated, climate change is also kind of an illness that is spreading over. So, ma'am, can you please elaborate more on the impacts of this climate change? Because that it could lead to many disastrous situations. So, I would like to know about those.
Yes. So when it comes to climate change, as Sega correctly mentioned, it's all about like rising CO2 levels and the other sort of greenhouse gases in the environment, and it creates some sort of a rising temperature effect. So this particular temperature is actually creating chaos. Unfortunately, our people, since because they are in a run to development, like maybe to achieve so much in their lifetime, so and they are like only seeing at GDP goals like gross domestic production and other sort of economic development. They don't really think about the other sources where they extract carbon dioxide from the environment. Like for example, they engage in deforestation, so they cut trees. So trees are actually photosynthesizing and they're using CO2 in the environment to produce some fruits and vegetables for us. So that is actually our first part of our food chain. It is the root of our food chain. So we cut these trees thinking of thinking of the development aspect only, but not having any sort of a mindset on the environment aspect. So especially like oxygen, we need oxygen to breathe. We need like the environment to live. We need a land to live first and foremost. If we don't have a land, where are we going to stay? So if we don't have an ocean, we can't even jump to the ocean even. So we need to have some place to live. Now when you look at like the symptoms of this illness, you could see that. Now I think recently, I don't know if you have watched news, you would have seen about 1 to 2 months back, there was a serious issue of coral bleaching. And this bleaching took place not in the normal places where the all these environmental activists have been raising their voice. This took place somewhere in Igambo side, where like they used to actively promote this coral reef for the tourists in that area. Like people who are visiting Sri Lanka, this is one of like our attractions of our country. So when these coral reefs, like once it bleaches, so then that is like one of the symptoms where it shows that the ocean water contains high concentrations of CO2, that is carbon dioxide. So it bleaches, and that is the destruction of that coral reef. And then Sri Lanka is ranked, recently, this just happened actually just before this vessel, the MV Express Pearl vessel sank in the Indian Ocean. So we were ranked as the fifth highest ocean polluter in the world. So just imagine being such a small country with such a small volume of land. If we pollute drastically our ocean, just imagine the people who are in the above our rank, like that is like China, USA, having massive lands and massive population as well. Comparatively, like China has more population than Sri Lanka. So we are actually in their level now, being such a small country. Just imagine if we were so big land wise and as well as by population, we would have destroyed the entire world. So this is where we are running. So when it comes to degradation of the environment, it contains a part of sea as well. This is something that we all are forgetting. And land as well. So land, if you take land issues, you'd see that there are lots and lots of activities that we engage with. We dredge, like maybe soil from all these rivers. So I think you'd have seen, like recently also, some people were arrested. They were doing some illegal sand mining at Valikanda in Sri Lanka. uh, so they do all these things. The thing is, they are trying to take a block of sand from that particular river, and they are going to fill that sand in another place, like they're trying to fill it, uh, maybe like for construction purposes or something like that. However, to get a small particle of sand, it takes like about millions of years, so we have to be very careful in all these things. And all these things might lead to disasters later on, because the earth is made to sustain by itself.
All right, so I'm sure that's why exactly we need to address these issues, because I'm sure we all are not taking these type of situations as as serious situations, isn't it? All right. So when we talk about this human mobility aspect, so what do you think? Like, can you provide us more insights about human mobility, and like, are there any legal definitions for such people who are affected by these kind of environmental effects? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So, fortunately or unfortunately, I would say that there is no such legal definition even for a migrant. Although, like Sri Lanka is a country where we have lots and lots of migrants, people are migrating all the time. Still, we don't have a legal acronym for that. I mean, we do understand that there are people called migrants, but there is no legal definition. Only we have something called a working definition. Now, similarly, if you look at even this environmental context also, there are people, I would say not in Sri Lanka though, but then in the world, you could see that a lot of people, they're using this term called climate refugee or environmental refugee, which is like a very wrong term to use. Because when we call a refugee means a person who is always, like seeking some sort of a place to safeguard that person's life out of the state, like you have to, like go out. But unfortunately, if you use that particular term for climate or environmental refugees, that is totally wrong, because as I mentioned earlier, there will be some sort of environmental degradation that takes place among us, around us. So there is a particular set of people who sense this. Okay, my well has less water than before, or my house is about to collapse due to some issue on the earth, or my sea is not giving me the usual catchment of fish. So if I consider all these things, basically I think, okay, something wrong is happening in my environment. So I think that is due to some climate issue. So why not I move from my place to another? So I consider this way before, and I leave my place, and I try to make my livelihood in other place. So these are basically climate migrants, right? These people sense it way before. Now the issue is that if they are the climate migrants, what will happen to those people who are displaced? What will happen to those people who have, really got affected? For example, now recently with this recent southwest monsoon floods and other rain situation and things like that, and even would have seen, like even with this uh, the MV Express Pearl vessel destruction in the sea, we'd have seen things happening to people. So these people have no livelihood; they don't have anywhere to go. And you would have seen Toduava, what had happened. Like their entire, like all their houses have been washed off to the sea. So these sort of people also have to be safeguarded. Because of that, like there is some sort of a working definition which is actually deriving from one of the legal binding agreement called Cancun Agreement, it is related to the Paris, conversations. However, so in UNFCCC's convention, they were in 2010 meetings. They actually spoke about it. They identified three sets of people: displaced population, migrant, and forced relocated people. So these sort of people are being identified legally to assist. So they are in the sector of environmental migrants, and a part of that would be climate migrants.
All right, ma'am. As you clearly said about environmental migrants, climate migrants, and displaced population, and you came to a point where you said that assistance is really a need. So, if we are to assist these people who are really suffering from all these situations, now how should we assist them?
So there could be like maybe two ways of assisting them. One is that in this environmental degradation is taking place. So although that, I mean, Sega very correctly mentioned, and you also mentioned, as well as the doctor. So people now understand that there's something happening. However, unfortunately, they don't understand that they have to act now. We have been given only 10 years sometime back. Now we are in the ninth year. So we are in the first year where we have only 9 years more to go. If we don't decrease the CO2 levels, I mean the temperature levels, by 1.5 degrees at least, the world itself is shut down. It has already taken place by having all these pandemics around, I think, because it made people to shut their work by itself. Just stop your activities and help me to survive, sort of. So the earth did it by itself. Now the thing is, there are two ways. One is to mitigate, either to adapt. So now the version of adapting, like, it's like, you have to live with it. It's like you are living with a cancer, sort of. You exactly know that it's disrupting and you have to live with it. So you have to be resilient, right? So in that resilient mode of living, you will have, like, agriculture, like, farming, those sort of things. For example, you need to actually try to see that there are ways and means of making this entire environment as a green sort of an environment, where we use those green skills in us. Maybe unfortunately we should not be wasting our electricity. It is also like aggravating more and more hydrocarbons. You would have seen like the queues of Sri Lanka, where they, once they got to know that the petrol prices are hiking, they were all in a queue. Why is that? Because they are so much interested about fuel, but they don't understand how they are burning it and the impact of it. Most of these farmers in the rural areas, they specifically leave their farming job and they migrate internally to Colombo to drive a three-wheeler. Fortunately or unfortunately, they are adding more CO2 to the environment. So they are leaving a green job and adding more to something. So these are the gaps actually, by
All
not
right.
understanding it.
All right, ma'am. So, as we see, like there are many areas that we as citizens we should focus on, and we should think that these are really serious issues. That are what sort of measures like can we take in order to sort of at least manage these situations? If you could give us some tips and ways at least to manage these situations, what would it be?
So there are many ways, but then I'll give you only three for now. One thing is that at least try in your level best to at least have one home garden for yourself, because time to come you will not have food seen, even, because it's going to be so disastrous. And the other thing is that you have to ensure that you do not waste all these I mean energy around us, because energy has to be safeguarded, and water, you have to safeguard water, because there is no such way that people have created to create H2O, in other means. So because if you don't get water, you cannot basically live. Water is very essential, right? Then number 3 is that try to help someone who wants to understand about climate change by reading it and by creating your own awareness. Thank you.
All right, ma'am. So thank you very much for those insights. And I'm really sure human beings are responsible for all what is happening around us. And this is a time where we know that the world is really trying to heal us. Segal, I'm sure you have something to add to this.
Of course, yes. I was really enjoying what Ms. Rangita was setting out. In fact, these are very simple things that we can do, but I don't know why we fail. And I think it's high time for us to create awareness, to think about these and what are the actions that we can take through these simple, initiatives. So on that, like what Yasasmi said now, we humans are the main reasons or determinants for these impacts. And not pathogens or any of that sorts. So speaking of pathogens, I want to go back to the health aspect and to delve a bit more deeply and to identify what are the reasons and what fits behind and stays behind of those cataclysmic impacts that we are currently facing at the moment. So, Doctor, if I may go to the next question, I would like to give a small background of the health indicators of Sri Lanka. So, in 2019, 82.5% accounts to the death due to non-communicable diseases as a percentage of total death. And they are predominantly due to the underlying conditions of heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, COPD in women, and so on and so forth. And around 56% of the child deaths are also due to lower respiratory disease, which are attributable to household air pollution and also due to heat. So these topics are very relevant when we contextualize to Sri Lankan context. So, Doctor, for the benefit of the audience, what is a non-communicable disease? And I strongly believe that there's a positive correlation existing between non-communicable disease and climate change. Do you agree on this? And if you do so, could you please elaborate a bit more on that, please? Thanks.
Well, non-communicable diseases are diseases which are not transmissible from one person to the other. Right. So now you would have heard about diabetes and then heart diseases, high blood pressure, stroke. So all those things are non-communicable diseases. Why? Because you will not get those diseases from one person to the other. You can't just get it. Now, I think it's very important for us to understand the health effects as we talked before. Now, again, of course, we talked about the greenhouse gases. But what we have to understand is air pollution, climate change, all these things are interrelated. Because, for example, certain greenhouse gases are air pollutants as well. If you take ground level ozone and also like sort of, carbon dioxide. So those are greenhouse gases as well. What happens is, now, as the other speaker mentioned, most of these things are emitted due to mainly fossil fuel burning and burning of stuff. So in that process, air pollutants like particulates are also emitted, right? So what we see is, we see these non-communicable diseases rising up, especially due to the air pollution that is taking place as we go along, with climate change. And certainly you see stroke, heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, like, these chronic lung diseases and cancers rising up. Actually, that is a significant problem. We need to understand air pollution is a silent killer, right? Earlier, of course, we were thinking that all these environmental risks, basically air pollution and all, was affecting only the lungs. But now, as you very correctly mentioned, there is plenty of evidence to show that it's not only the lung, but certainly the heart, the brain, and even cancers we can get due to all these environmental determinants, especially air pollution, and certainly, as I mentioned, air pollution is very closely linked to climate change.
Yes, doctor. Thank you very much. Because often when we are diagnosed with some sort of an underlying condition, what we do is we rush to the hospital, we get the best doctors in consultation or whoever is available, and we try to cure it. That's all what we do. But we never think really what is the climate change has to play in those areas. So it's really important for us to know that climate change is not only making disasters here and there, but also impeding our own health. And it's very important for us to understand and to minimize air pollution as much as we can, as you rightly said. Also, doctor, now, if you look at the current context, I need to do some justice to COVID-19 because it's the hot topic at the moment. So, and also it's wreaking havoc in other sense. So, SARS-CoV-2, MERS, Nipah virus, avian influenza virus, you name it. We have lots of virus. And in fact, Dr. Peter Piot, who was instrumental in identifying Ebola virus somewhere in 1986, said that we live in a virus planet. I believe there are a lot of pathogens which are yet to be discovered. And we are, on one side, we are like, heating the earth, like, put it into a pan and heating it constantly through the CO2 emission, greenhouse emission. So the species are moving towards poles to find new habitats. And while they go, they will encounter some pathogens which they have never encountered before. So that would be a perfect recipe for these zoonotic transmissions, right? So, doctor, could you elaborate a bit more on what are communicable diseases on the other hand? And do you believe that climate change has something to do with SARS-CoV-2, its emergence, and also its subsequent mutations?
I think that is a very interesting question. Well, communicable diseases are basically the opposite of non-communicable diseases, I guess. And then communicable diseases are diseases that you get due to biological agents, right? So their presence, their growth, and infections cause communicable diseases. There are different kinds of communicable diseases, which are these airborne infections, respiratory infections, and maybe the gastrointestinal infections. All those are considered communicable diseases. Well, we need to understand that climate change is really helping these emerging and non re-emerging diseases. I will just explain that very briefly. Emerging diseases are new diseases that are coming up. Now, as you very correctly mentioned, now SARS-CoV-2, right? This disease is quite new to the world. And also, it's an emerging disease. But re-emerging diseases are diseases already controlled. But due to these environmental factors being very favorable, they can again come up. So those are re-emerging diseases. And I know that climate change, these scientists, they have always predicted these emerging and re-emerging diseases to happen with climate change. That is what we are seeing currently. What we need to understand is these climatic factors, when they change, especially the temperatures rising up and all these other climatic parameters, like they are being disturbed, all those things will facilitate the growth of other biological agents and also facilitate the transmission of diseases from other animals to humans. Actually, we did not, I don't know, we never imagined a pandemic of this nature during our lifetime, did we? But we are experiencing that. I certainly agree with the other speaker. I suppose the nature is trying to heal herself. She gave so many warnings, but unfortunately, we kept a deaf ear, I guess. We were not listening. Now, she's teaching us a very good lesson, right? So if we are intelligent enough, at least this may be the last chance. We need to understand this is about the survival of human species. And we need to understand that for our survival, we need to join hands with the other species on this planet. Right? So I think the nature is trying to teach us that lesson. Not only these emerging and re-emerging diseases, the vector-borne diseases. You know about dengue. Dengue is quite a serious problem in Sri Lanka and in so many other countries. Well, now, initially, when dengue was identified in Sri Lanka, we saw it only in certain localized areas. We never saw dengue those times, I'm saying, in the central hilly parts of Sri Lanka. Now you can see dengue is all over Sri Lanka. With the projections, what they say is further, dengue is going to spread further in countries where dengue is not a problem anymore. We will see dengue Now, you know that malaria is eradicated in Sri Lanka, but we need to be very watchful. This climate can be vector-borne diseases be very challenging. You can things like emerging diseases, re-emerging diseases, vector-borne diseases, all those things. If they are like, if we have to face what this is going to be, not the communicable diseases. Already fighting things are going to be on the rise. Therefore, right, this is the future we will face if we are not very careful and if we don't think about this climate change seriously. Unfortunately, the future of humans will not be so bright.
Well, doctor, that is very alarming, the way you ended your comment. And that is really important because that's the truth. That's the reality. That's where we are heading towards. So it's really important for us to understand the negative impacts of what we are doing. And also, doctor, you rightly mentioned about emerging and re-emerging disease. And also, I think when I digged into the WHO's country profile report in 2016, it predicts in 2100 years, malaria can re-emerge. So that is also quite alarming. Now we are worrying about what we have at hand, but when we think about what we are going to get, it's very, very alarming. And I think this is the right time for us to take action. And also it depends, and it relies on the next generation. It's a generational impact that we are going towards. It's not only us. Even myself, I'm being a youth. I'm also thinking about the next generation. All right, so it's pretty sad, and we need to react very fast to this. Also, doctor, thank you for setting up the aspects of communicable disease, non-communicable disease, and vector-borne disease. I think audience would have got a better understanding. Also, doctor, so whatever we do to the environment, we will be definitely facing an economic impact. Well, of course, I have my personal interest in economics and development, but that is the truth, because we never factor in the social cost aspect, which the state has to bear, or individuals have to bear. We never factor in that social cost into government expenditure. That social cost hasn't been included into the budget, national budget. So these are some of the areas that we need to look. And giving some stats, Sri Lanka was ranked 4th in 2018. By reference of German Watch as the 4th risked countries in the world that could face impacts of climate change. So this is not an achievement. Please don't misunderstand. So this is a warning again. And that year we have lost around 1.6 billion US dollars purchasing power parity, and that is equivalent to 0.6%, if I'm not mistaken, 0.6% of the percentage of GDP. And it's really worrying because we are worrying at repaying the loans and we are looking at compensation for shipwrecks and so on. So these are some of the these are some of the hidden costs that we are repaying. So, Doctor, how could you elaborate on the economic impact of climate change induced health issues, if you may, explain it?
Well, thank you very much for that very good question. Well, now I was describing the health effects of climate change. I was talking about the cardiovascular diseases. I was describing about the respiratory diseases. I was describing about the emerging, re-emerging, as well as the vector-borne diseases. But if you just try to understand the health costs, it's not only that. Foodborne diseases, waterborne diseases, they are also predicted to rise with climate change. Not only that, food is going to be something very important. We will have food shortages, and then, of course, that is going to affect the development of children. Especially, you would realize when pregnant mothers, you see, when there is scarcity of food, the pregnant mothers will not have enough food. So that is going to affect the development of the fetus inside. So therefore, with climate change again, we think that in time to come, we will have low birth weight babies and, of course, developmental issues among children. Not only that, of course, water scarcity is again going to be a problem with sanitation issues, right? So that is the future that we are heading for. And also, if you just try to think of the psychological aspects, especially the mental health aspects, right? When you have natural disasters, even Sri Lanka, we are currently facing these floods, right? When you have natural disasters, you have death, disability, loss of land, loss of property. Can you understand and imagine the mental stress that they are going through, right? Why I described all these health impacts is certainly we need to understand there is a huge health cost when we talk of climate change. Certainly, the governments, especially in a country like Sri Lanka, the health is free. Therefore, the government has to spend huge amounts to treat these sick people. And if you can understand, it is going to rise further, the health budget, right? So that is the health cost. And on the other hand, things like rising temperatures and all the other impacts I mentioned is going to affect the employees or the workers of this country. Therefore, we are anticipating productivity loss, the economic loss. Especially, we are a country, we have a lot of agricultural workers, right? With increasing temperatures, they are going to face issues. Their productivity is going to be affected. In fact, they say that there is some relationship between increasing temperatures and chronic renal disease that we are currently experiencing. So with all that, the livelihoods of people, they are going to be affected due to climate change and especially health effects. So you can imagine the productivity loss and the economic loss that we have to face in the future. I mean, we are currently also facing these things, but in the future, that is going to increase. On the other hand, we need to understand climate change is affecting certain groups at a greater and or increased risk, right? So certain groups are very vulnerable, especially children, I would say, and also pregnant women and females and those who are already having diseases, especially they are prone to all these non-communicable diseases, right? So children, of course, if they are affected, you can see the cost that we have to pay. Children are the future of this country, right? We do everything for our children. so you can understand their cost. I don't know whether we can ever calculate that. Last but not least, I would like to draw your attention to the suffering that all of us will face due to climate change related health effects. Just tell me, health economists, to calculate a way of costing the suffering.
Well, of course, Doctor, thank you very much. Uh, I'm also thinking as to how to cost the sufferings of communities. And Doctor, you rightly mentioned we need to worry about the economic cost, the social cost, and the health cost as individuals, what they have to incur, and also the state, because we are also heavily focusing on welfareism and giving free health, and that is an additional burden that we need to worry about. So it's in the hands of state, but we can't, being human, being this own citizens, being patriotic about the country, we can't always point at the state. Also, it's our own responsibility, right? Everything won't fall from the sky, so we need to take our own actions to mitigate these negative impacts that we are making. So Doctor, with that, I would like to also move into the final question of the session, that is, what can the state actors and the stakeholders could do to manage or mitigate the incoming climate change induced health issues?
Well, before I answer that, I would like to mention this. Now, we are currently experiencing a pandemic. What is this pandemic trying to teach us? Well, it's a pandemic and it's seen all over. So basically, what I think is the pandemic, the COVID virus is trying to teach us to unite, all humans to unite. So that is why it was made a pandemic, I guess. That was why it was not localized to certain areas, right? So what this COVID disease is trying to teach us is unite the human species, whether you are from the European region or from the Asian region or the Africas or the Americas, unite. That is where your survival is in the future, right? So thinking in the same lines, well, all of us, we need to unite in the first place. We need to understand that all of us, we have a responsibility. The government has a responsibility. Not only the government, governments of all countries, they have a responsibility. Now, if you just think all these health effects are due to these greenhouse gases, and other sectors in the government, they need to come, and help, especially each and every one of us. Well, the industrial sector has to come in, the transport sector has to come in, the agriculture, the local government, where we sort of manage the waste. So all sectors, they have to come in, and then we all need to have some concerted approach to mitigate as well as to adapt to climate change related health effects. All government sector actors need to unite, and then only we will be able to face this effectively. Not only the government, but certainly academia, as well as the non-governmental organization, the CBOs, all of us, we need to get together and support each other. Most importantly, the communities and all individual people. We need to understand that all of us are responsible. It's not the government. Sometimes I see certain people, they just blame certain sectors. But we need to understand that we are, or an individual is a very important person in contributing to the mitigatory actions as well as these adaptation measures. So action should start with them as well at all levels. It has to happen at all levels at the same time. As individuals, also, all walks of life have a responsibility. All ages, they have a responsibility. Especially the children, they too have a responsibility. How? I will just give you a very simple example due to the time constraints. Well, we know that food is going to be a big issue in the future. So the children of this country, they should not waste food. Whatever their parents give, they need to eat. Food wastage has to be stopped. So the children, they just can practice those things from their small ages. Sustainable consumption. I mean, that's a kind of a big word, but still, what is sustainable consumption? Well, use the resources efficiently and effectively. Very simple example. The children don't have like 10 pencils. Use one pencil. Once that pencil is over, please get the other one. How many pencils, pens, erasers our children have? Right? So that is basically sustainable consumption in very simple terms. And also the youth of this country, you all have a huge responsibility, right? I suppose you need to engage in these matters more. We need your help. All universities, all like, other agencies, youth, wherever, you need to support this. You need to um, start thinking about this very seriously. As adults, we have a huge responsibility. We should be able to sacrifice certain things for the betterment of our children, right? For the future generations. And also the elderly, the most respectful, and then they have done so much to this country. They also have a huge role to play. So every one of us. And last but not least, if we all unite and if we sort of act together, I'm sure we will be able to delay this so that the generations to come, at least, they will be able to live some kind of a happy life on this planet. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Doctor. That was indeed very, it made a lot of sense what you said, because the word that I took from your discussion, in a nutshell, if I may put it, that's concerted effort, very rightly said, and the responsibilities that we have, be it the state or CSOs, INGOs, parents, adults, children. So they need to do their part. Those, kind of interventions could be very simple, but we often forget. That's the problem here. Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much for, kind of reiterating on those points. So we've got a few questions. I think, Yasasmi, are you ready with the questions to, shoot?
Yes, Sega. So thank you very much for the audience because we got a few questions popping up. So this question is for you, Mrs. Rangita. Amidst the pandemic, a certain critical decision is being considered and attention is paid off for organic fertilizer, which is one of the hot topics these days. So I think if you could elaborate more on the pros and cons of adapting such organic fertilizers and how it is relevant to the climate crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, actually, I think the answer for this question is quite long, but then I will make it very short by giving you some sort of a insight only. I think even the doctor also could contribute later on in the health aspect of it. So, as per my knowledge and as per my understanding, it is like personally, I feel that the worst chaotic sort of disastrous impact is created not only by the fertilizer issue, it's by the pesticides, right? Because pesticides are actually creating a big havoc. Now, the issue is like, for example, without any sort of a back end solution, um, if you are like trying to quickly adapt some sort of a change without a proper change management process, then these farmers who have got really adapted to the other sort of chemical fertilizers They don't have any other means of understanding or knowledge to process to process organic fertilizer, because for prolonged period of time they have got used to use it, right? So because of that, there should be some sort of a mechanism or some sort of a knowledge given to them before we stop something entirely. Now the issue is, still they have to get adapted to this situation now. Time to come, they don't get any sort of chemical fertilizers, they have to get adapted. I mean, climate change wise, yes, it is a very good decision that you have taken. Why? Because if you look at, like, in the past, maybe, like, the ages of our maybe parents when they were small, or maybe when our grandparents were small, none of them knew about chemical fertilizers, because they all ate food by made through organic fertilizers only. And I must tell that those people are more healthier than us, if you really look at them, because the value chain is created like that. And the thing is, if you're looking at a natural solution to enable this and to create this into a climate change sort of a resilient sort of a mechanism, what we could do is the waste that we use could be remade into organic fertilizers, and it could be utilized in our agricultural means and methods or modes or things like that. And also it also develops some sort of pesticide effects as well. However, I think, I mean, time to come, the farmers will obviously keep on using high levels of pesticides in order to counter this sort of complete ban of chemical fertilizers. It will actually aggravate the problem, in my personal understanding. So, anyways, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. And we are getting more and more questions, but we are really sorry and because we due to the time constraints, we will not be answering everyone. Sega, I'm sure you have something to add to this.
Yes, maybe yes, I can put a positive spin on the previous question. Doctor, now that question is basically centered upon utilization of fertilizers and pesticides. Now, as you may know, in Sri Lanka, if you go to the north central province, a lot of people are impacted with chronic kidney disease and so on. So, how do you twist it in a health aspect, doctor? The same question. If you have to add any few comments on that.
Well, I think, as like she explained, yes, this chemical usage is a problem, right? So therefore, maybe, like it has to be. I also believe that it has to be taught in a very comprehensive manner, because otherwise there can be other issues, right? So what we really want is, like less chemical usage. Well, when a lot of chemicals are used, certainly if they are bioaccumulative, that means if they get accumulated in the food, and then as we consume food, of course the human health can be affected, right? So I suppose they took this decision to sort of reduce that. On the other hand, it's interesting to understand, as like mentioned previously, how our ancestors, they did their cultivation. So probably it's an experiment for us to see. On the other hand, what I feel is, with climate change, I suppose we need to be mindful of using these things, so that we will be able to have enough production as well, right? So all those things have to be considered. But not only the fertilizer, as very correctly mentioned, the pesticide usage, all those things, basically the chemical usage has to be managed if we are to see a reduction of all these health effects.
Yes, thank you, doctor. And I also want to add, I think the policy formulation also has to factor in these important elements to make better policies and sound policies. So with that, Dr. and Ms. Rangita, we would like to conclude the question and answer session, because I can see a lot of questions are popping in, but we are extremely sorry because of the time constraint. We can't take all the questions, but we are happy to write answers on our Facebook page. So let me just conclude. So throughout this conversation, throughout this discussion, what I wanted to say is we have 9 more years to go, and we need to have a concerted effort. So those were the catchy clauses for me. And if I may sum it up, on one hand, for years, these greenhouse gas emissions building up in the atmosphere, increasing the heat of the globe. I think the main impediment is burning of fossil and fuel, extensive fossil and fuel. On the other hand, the biodiversity crisis, right? Because there are a lot of extinctions, habitat loss due to agriculture and unplanned human settlement. And also when you go to the marine and aquatic resources, a lot of destruction in that aspect as well. So these two groups work and operate in silos, but they add to the same impact, that is carbon emission, right? And which leads to this whole idea of global warming. And this leads to the heat trapping, right? So we need to really protect. We need to think ahead. We need to protect. We need to restore our nature, the biodiversity. We need to help limit the global warming. And like Doctor said, it's a concerted effort. We need to work as a team with everyone, playing their roles rightly. And also, Ms. Rangita said that if we don't prevent these things, we'll be facing more and more issues in the future. And there's like no way out when the earth tries to heal by herself. So that is the other area that I wanted to touch upon, because the ultimate outcome is the human mobility. When these things happen, human mobility will be exuberantly increasing, and it will be very hard to manage in the future. So the action must start with you, and it should start now, because Earth is the only place which can harbor life, at least for now. So with that concluding remark, I must also thank our resource person, Dr. Inoka and Ms. Rangita, for their valuable input and sacrificing their time on a weekend to build awareness on these important areas which are growing. Now only people are starting to realize and understand the impacts. So it's very timely intervention. And I would like to thank and give my credentials to Town Talk for facilitating such an event at this juncture. And also Yasasmi, my fellow moderator, for moderating and asking some important questions, which makes our community to ponder in future. So until we meet again, stay safe, and please don't go offline, because there's a video that we want to play. So that will, will be a food for thought for you to think about some of the areas and aspects that we've discussed today. And I hope it was very informative. So stay safe and see you.
Hi, come on in, have a seat. So good morning, everyone. When's the last time any of you drew a picture?
Last time.
Today we're here to draw. So what you'll see in each box, choose your colors wisely, because there will be another group coming in after you and making another picture with what you leave behind. So here we have the other group.
Everybody say hi.
Why don't we show the kids the pictures that we've drawn?
Yeah,
So nice.
Wow. Yes.
Why don't you show them what you drew?
It's all black. We all took away the bright colors.
I wish I wasn't this selfish, taking away all the bright colors.
Maybe we could have broken the colors and left half of them for them and for the next group.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and it's our pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and I think it was a very good session. Thank you, all of you, for joining.